Foremost, a fair and just salary. Not just a salary, a fair and just salary. There's a hadith in Bukhari where Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, I will be an opponent. I will be an opponent. Meaning I will stand in opposition to three categories of people on the day of Qiyamah. Who will be able to withstand the Nabi of Allah standing against him on the day of Qiyamah? And from those three categories of people, one is that person who employs a worker, takes the maximum work, but does not pay an adequate wage. The Nabi of Allah says, it can be a Christian, it can be a Jew, it can be an atheist, it can be a person who believes in traditional gods and deities, but they are the creation of Allah. I will stand as their advocate and your opponent on the day of Qiyamah. If you take a full day's work and you don't pay adequate salary. Now excuses are many. We can say, well, they agreed. I told them up front that this is all I can afford and they agreed. The question is, did they have an option? If a person doesn't have a job, they'll agree to anything, even if they know that it's tantamount to slave labor. So they may have agreed, and technically your obligation may have been discharged, but will you be able to stand in front of the Nabi of Allah on the day of Qiyamah and say that I gave the adequate wage that I could afford? Now that brings us to the second point. Many times when it comes to the wage of those people who are in our employ, we argue, but that is all that I can afford. We need to be honest. We need to be honest. Sometimes the gadgets that our children play with is more than the monthly salary of the domestic in our homes. The gadget that we buy to pacify the irritation that my child is causing to me. I want this, I want this, I want this. So you buy the gadget for the kid. That gadget more times than not costs more than the entire salary of the domestic. The Eid clothes that we buy for our family, let's be honest. And these people work for us and they see everything. How do they feel as humans? For a moment, just visualize. Sit in your home and visualize that if I was the domestic and she was the boss and they were living the kind of life that I am living, and I was getting the kind of compensation that she is getting and the kind of treatment. Some of us in our businesses, mashallah, every year we go for Umrah and we take our whole family. But there are people working for us for 30 years who haven't been able to save to perform their Farad Hajj. Look, as I said, Allah has given some more and Allah has given others less. Your employees will never be able to enjoy the same extent that you enjoy. Because you earning as one individual, you got to see to multiple. But now and then, we need to spare a thought. Every year, I take my children, grandchildren, we go for Umrah, we burn holes in the Tawaf and Mataf. But there's a man working for 30 years in my company, in my shop, in my business, and he hasn't yet been able to save enough to perform his Farad Hajj. Where's the compassion? Where's the dignity? So we can argue that, you know what, I can't afford it. But is it really the case that we can't afford it? No one is saying that your domestic or your employees must live at the same level as you are living. But now and then spare thoughts. Sacrifice a few luxuries just to be able to provide for them a few more necessities. And if you really can't afford it, then don't take full work. Don't tell her to work the full day and then just pay her half of what is even the minimum wage in terms of what is legislated. We are not doing our employees a favor. That's why I went through that elaborate introduction. That is merely the system of Allah. That Allah has given to some more and to others less to create that system of interdependence. Otherwise, we need them just as much as they need us. And they can become a means for us attaining our salvation. On the other hand, they can also become a means of us having to account for a lot in the hereafter. So, a good employer, a Muslim employer, will ensure that the relationship with his employees is based on justice, compassion, and dignity. And what does that mean? It means that share in their joy, share in their sorrow, show that you care about their personal lives, acknowledge and appreciate their efforts, greet them, smile at them. Let me ask myself and all of you a question, really. And I ask Marf in advance if I offend you, but sometimes we just need to be brutal in being very straightforward. Majority of us sitting here, majority of us, we have domestics at home. How much do we know about their lives? And don't tell me it's the wife's responsibility. The wife may be interacting with them on a more regular level, But the wife's attitude and behavior towards the domestic is also your responsibility, because you're the head of the household. If she's falling short, if she's ill-treating, you will also be held accountable in the court of Allah. How many of us, myself included, know what's happening in the lives of our domestics? What's happening in the lives of those who are assisting us and those who are helping us? Do we greet them? Do we smile with them? They are on their knees cleaning the toilets in our homes. The clothes that you and I are wearing here for Jummah, all very spiritual in the house of Allah. Who ironed those clothes? Even if it was washed in the washing machine. Who brought it there for us, prim and proper? Everything from the kurta to the socks. They did everything. Do we greet them? Do we smile with them? Do we acknowledge them? Is our relationship with our domestics based on justice, compassion and dignity? And then our wrongful behavior is passed on to the next generation. Sometimes your hair stands on end. Your hair stands on end when you see how small children in a home talk to the domestics who are old enough to be their grandparents. Where did they learn that from? The language, the tone, the condescension. Do we think we will only account in front of Allah for salah, zakah, hajj and saum? We will have to account for in front of Allah in terms of how we treated these human beings, even if they are not Muslim. Forget non-Muslims. In our masjids, we only know the muaddin when we want the aircon off, or we want the window open, or we want the lights on. And then we speak to him with a superiority complex, a condescending tone, that because you're taking a salary, you're my knocker. Because you are of a particular skin color, you must listen to me. What I tell you, you must do. Have we no fear of Allah? Have we no fear of Allah? It doesn't mean that someone takes a wage and someone takes a salary that we can speak to them how they want. You know, what I find really ironic is sometimes we will give big checks in charity, massive checks in charity, but we cannot pay our employees at the business or at the home an adequate wage. Allah is watching. Allah is watching. I'm not saying we are insincere in our charity. I'm saying, where is our priorities? You know what pains me, brothers, and I'll be honest, and this is just a frank discussion, and please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about time. There are many women folk in our homes, elderlies, our mothers and grandmothers, who are very pious. They burn holes in the musalla. They read more Quran than even the ulama and the huffaz. They're more punctual with their salah than all of the men. But they have racist tendencies. And they ill-treat the domestics because they are of a different skin color. I'm not going to be judgmental in terms of who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. But I will remind myself and remind you, as men we have a responsibility in our homes. That hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was a very pious woman who ill-treated a cat. And because of her ill-treatment of a cat, she was punished in the hellfire. We need to rein in our mothers and our grandmothers. Not only because the political landscape has changed and we're sitting on a powder keg that could explode at any time in terms of racial tensions. That's a political objective. We have to do it because as Muslims it's the right thing to do. It simply is. Now we cannot try and counterbalance it by saying, but we do so much in terms of positives. Of course that is there and may Allah accept. But the negatives need to be tackled head on. It needs to be tackled head on and it needs to be eradicated. How many of us in this congregation, and I speak to myself first, we have non-Muslim black employees, either at business or at home. How many of us can honestly say in the house of Allah that our conduct and the conduct of our families have left them with a positive impression of Islam? You know, we are hypocrites when we talk about da'wah. We must establish a da'wah center and we must go into the townships and we must pull people towards Islam. That has its place. But what about da'wah in our own businesses? Da'wah in our own homes. You don't need to open a Quran and a Bible and do a comparison for them. What kind of akhlaq and character do we showcase? Does it bring them closer to the teachings of Islam? Accepting Islam is in the hands of Allah. Or does it create within them resentment for Islam and Muslims based on how they are treated? One is, we have a condescending relationship towards our employees. And the other is, we have a totally racist approach towards the way we deal with our employees. We eat one thing and then we give them the scraps. What the child couldn't finish, then we say, oh, it's still clean. Why don't you have it? Why not take out for the domestic before you serve for everyone else? Okay, for cultural reasons, the domestic doesn't like that kind of food. Not every domestic will enjoy dal and rice, fair enough. But we eat fruit, then we give them the scraps. That part closest to the pit on which there's hardly anything left on the skin, that now we give to them. And they're watching everything. They're watching everything. And the kids pick up this thing and they perpetuate the cycle, because one day they become employers of the same people. Now, I want to address, and bear me out on time, it's a public holiday, right? But these are key issues. I want to address this issue because there are many of us, and I've had this argument all the time. When you have a talk like this, they'll say, oh, Maulana, all well and good, but you know what? They never appreciate. They never appreciate. You can look after them for 30 years, they'll still rob you. And they'll still kill you. And they'll still torture you before they rob you. Let me ask you this question. Are we more tolerant to the wrongs when it comes to people of our own race, and we have very little tolerance when it comes to the wrongs of people of another race? So we say that the black people that we employ in nature and in general are dishonest. That's what we say, let's be honest, right? So what about people in our own community? How many Indian Muslims are fraudsters? How many Indian Muslims are gambling? How many Indian Muslims are cheating on their spouses? Then we're very tolerant. Hey, one mistake, look at the person's good, hide the person's fault. But then when it comes to the black person that is in our employ, you can never trust them. They are never appreciative. In this world, who's appreciative? Your child appreciates what you do for him. Do our children appreciate what we do for them? Do we appreciate what our parents did for us? So when it comes to our own shortcomings, when it comes to our own failures, then we show a greater degree of tolerance. Then we want to argue in a different direction. But when it comes to those who are in our employ, so even if they are dishonest and even if they are not appreciative, it does not give you the license to ill-treat them. They will have to account before Allah for their actions. You will have to account before Allah for your actions. Enough with the excuses. Enough with the justifications. As Muslims, we just need to get on with it and do what is right. We need to understand what is our responsibility as employers and do what is right. Many of the reasons as to why they treat us the way they treat us, in terms of when you're paying somebody a pittance, then if they steal the change that's lying around in the house, what do you expect? It's motivated by resentment. When you treat them like animals, then when they come back and harm you, what do you expect? And even if your treatment was good and they do it, we also have faults within our ranks, but we show greater tolerance. So the question this afternoon, we're ahead of Workers' Day, we're talking that in Islam, what is the relationship between an employee and employee? It's based on justice, compassion, and dignity. There's a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wherein the Nabi of Allah says, "Al-mu'minu ya'laf wa yu'laf, wa la khayra fi man la ya'laf wa la yu'laf." A Muslim loves and is loved. And there is no goodness in that person who doesn't love and is not loved. Again, a burning question. You and I, do our domestics, do our helpers, and do our employees love us? Do they love us? Really? They may show superficial respect because we signed the paycheck. Has our attitude, our behavior, and our character been such that they love us? When you treat them as Islam tells you to treat them, and when you treat them as Islam tells you to treat them, you're not doing them a favor, you're fulfilling your obligation to Allah. But there will be spiritual benefits in terms of reward, there'll also be material benefits. I'll share with you two quotes and I conclude. They say, a person who feels appreciated will always do more than what is expected. A person who feels appreciated will always do more than what is expected. Treat employees like they make a difference, and they will. So go home with this message to yourself. Don't judge others. Don't look for excuses. Where there are faults, let's be honest and let's rectify it whilst we are still alive. Go home with this message to yourself and take this message to our women folk. That enough of the excuses, enough of the justifications. As Muslims, we are accountable to Allah, and we will have to stand before Allah on the day of Qiyamah, and we will have to account for how we treated our workers. Their wrongs is on their head. Our wrongs is on our head. We can and we should treat our workers better. They are our helpers. They are not our slaves. Don't judge others on what I've said. Judge yourself. Remember, it is about time that we stop investing in things and we start investing in human beings. May Allah grant me and all of us the tawfiq. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum.